The year was 1587. A small fleet of wooden ships cut across the grey waters of the Atlantic, their sails heavy with wind, their decks crowded with men, women, and children. They were not soldiers sent to conquer, nor merchants in search of quick profit. They were settlers, people willing to leave behind everything they had ever known in England to carve out a new life in an untamed land. Weeks at sea had worn them thin. Salt spray crusted their skin, the wind had whipped their faces raw, and the endless horizon had seemed to stretch on forever. But at last, after more than a month of uncertainty, they saw it, a narrow strip of sandy coast fringed with dense green forests. This was Roanoke Island, off the shores of what we now call North Carolina. Here, they believed, they would find their future. They would build houses, raise families, plant crops that would feed them for years to come. This was to be the first permanent English settlement in the New World, a foothold for their nation on a vast and largely unknown continent. Yet this hope would not last. Within just 3 years, the settlement would vanish completely. When English ships returned in 1590, they found the place deserted. The houses had been dismantled. Tools, belongings, and weapons were gone. There were no bodies, no signs of a struggle, only an eerie stillness and a single word carved into a wooden post: CROATOAN. The meaning of that word has been debated for centuries. Was it a clue pointing toward an island to the south where a friendly native tribe lived? Or was it a final, desperate message from people who knew they were doomed? The disappearance of the Roanoke colony has become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Theories abound: starvation, conflict, disease, storms, even supernatural forces. But the truth remains hidden, somewhere in the shadowed space between history and legend. The story of Roanoke is not just about a missing colony. It is about human ambition colliding with the unforgiving reality of a new world. It is about hope, courage, and the thin line between survival and oblivion. And above all, it is a reminder that sometimes history refuses to give us answers, leaving only questions that echo across the centuries. Chapter 1. A New World Beckons. It began in the year 1584, during an age when much of the world still remained a blank space on European maps. Across the oceans, whispers told of vast lands, untamed, fertile, and filled with wonders beyond imagining. To the English crown, these lands represented more than just a new horizon. They were the key to a future of wealth, power, and influence. In the bustling port cities of England, the scent of salt hung heavy in the air, mingling with the sounds of shipwrights hammering oak and merchants shouting their wares. It was a time when the sea itself seemed to call out to the ambitious and the desperate alike. Men spoke in taverns of endless forests, rivers rich with fish, and fields where gold might be plucked from the very soil. Yet with every tale came a shadow, the dangers of storms, strange climates, and peoples whose customs were unknown to the English mind. At the heart of this great push toward the unknown was a man named Sir Walter Raleigh. Charismatic, driven, and favored by Queen Elizabeth I herself, Raleigh had secured the right to establish England's first colony in the so-called New World. His eyes were fixed upon a particular stretch of land along the North American coast, a place known to the Algonquian-speaking peoples as Roanoke. Roanoke lay off the coast of what is now North Carolina, a narrow island embraced by calm, shallow waters and protected from the harsh Atlantic by a string of barrier islands. To English ears, it sounded like a place of promise, a sheltered haven where settlers might establish a foothold in the New World. Yet even in those first days, the land seemed cloaked in a kind of quiet secrecy, as though it had stories it was not yet ready to share. The first voyages were exploratory in nature. Ships arrived, their hulls creaking with the strain of long weeks at sea. Sailors disembarked onto sandy shores where tall grasses swayed in the wind and pine forests whispered in the distance. The explorers wrote of fertile soil, of deer moving like shadows at the forest's edge, of strange birds whose songs filled the air. They also recorded meeting the native CROATOAN and CROATOAN peoples, encounters that were cautious, sometimes friendly, and sometimes tense. The English brought with them goods to trade, copper pots, iron tools, and bright beads, but they also carried unseen companions, foreign diseases that could devastate native communities. Even in these earliest moments, the delicate balance between hope and disaster was already forming. By 1587, the dream of a permanent settlement had taken root. Over 100 men, women, and children set sail from England, their lives carefully packed into wooden chests and barrels. They were not soldiers or adventurers, but families, people who intended to live, work, and grow old in this strange new land. Among them was John White, the colony's governor, and his daughter, Eleanor Dare, who was soon to give birth to the first English child born in the Americas. The journey was long and often grueling. Days were measured by the creak of rigging, the slap of waves against the hull, and the ever-present tang of salted meat and stale biscuit. At night, passengers stared into the blackness beyond the ship's rail, wondering what awaited them. Would they find the lush paradise promised in Raleigh's visions, or would they be met with danger, hunger, and loss? When they finally arrived in late summer, the air was heavy with heat, and the cries of seabirds wheeled overhead. The colony was established on Roanoke Island itself, a place both familiar to earlier English visitors and yet largely unknown to those who now hoped to call it home. They began building shelters, repairing old fortifications left behind by previous expeditions, and planting what crops they could before winter set in. But Roanoke was not an empty canvas. The land bore the marks of those who had lived there long before. Native villages scattered along the waterways, paths beaten into the earth by countless feet and a deep knowledge of the tides, the seasons, and the gifts of the land. The settlers, with their European customs and expectations, found themselves in a place where nature's rhythms were unfamiliar and survival depended on understanding them. As summer waned, the colony's first cracks began to show. Supplies dwindled faster than expected. Relationships with some of the local tribes grew strained, marred by misunderstandings, cultural divides, and the lingering shadow of earlier hostilities. Whispers passed through the settlement that the winter ahead would be harsh, and there was talk, soft at first, of sending Governor White back to England to request aid. And so, in the final weeks before autumn's chill, White prepared to leave his daughter, his infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare, and the rest of the colonists behind. He promised to return with supplies and reinforcements in just a few months' time. But the sea has its own plans. Chapter 2. The Dream of a New World. When the winds of change swept across Europe in the late 1500s, they carried with them not just the scent of salt from the Atlantic, but whispers of a new world. This was an age of restless ambition, when maps were still being redrawn, when rumors of golden cities and untamed lands were traded like precious coins in the dimly lit halls of power. Queen Elizabeth I, her court glittering with silks and secrets, was determined to see England take its place among the great colonizers of the age. Across the sea, Spain had grown rich from its conquests, hauling treasures back from the Americas. England, eager to challenge its rival, set its sights on a distant stretch of coastline the natives called Wingandacoa. It was into this atmosphere of daring and uncertainty that the dream of Roanoke was born. Sir Walter Raleigh, a man equal parts adventurer, courtier, and dreamer, secured a royal charter to explore and claim these far-off lands in the Queen's name. His ambition was grand, to establish a permanent English presence in the New World, a foothold from which wealth, power, and influence might flow back across the ocean. The first expedition in 1584 was one of reconnaissance, a voyage meant to taste the waters, meet the inhabitants, and survey the possibilities. The men sent to explore were met by lush forests that swayed in the coastal breeze, rivers that shimmered like liquid glass, and the hum of life in 1,000 unseen creatures. They returned to England with tales of fertile lands, mild climate, and friendly native peoples. It was a vision so bright, so filled with promise, that it intoxicated the minds of those who heard it. By 1585, Raleigh sent a larger group, around 100 men, to establish the first settlement on Roanoke Island. Among them were soldiers, craftsmen, and gentlemen, each chasing his own vision of fortune. For some, it was the lure of land ownership in a place unclaimed by European powers. For others, the hope of finding gold or exotic resources. The journey across the Atlantic was long and brutal. Weeks of cramped quarters, salt-soaked clothes, and the constant threat of storms or hostile ships. Yet, when they finally saw the green outline of Roanoke Island rising from the horizon, the men must have felt the thrill of destiny. But the promise of this new world quickly revealed its shadows. The settlers found themselves in an environment far less forgiving than the glowing reports had suggested. Supplies dwindled. The unfamiliar climate tested their endurance, and relations with the native tribes, initially warm, began to cool as mistrust and misunderstandings crept in. The Algonquian-speaking peoples, led by figures like Chief Wingina, saw in these pale-skinned newcomers both opportunity and danger. At first, they exchanged food and knowledge for English goods, but tensions flared when cultural differences clashed and resources ran thin. By the summer of 1586, the settlement was on the brink of collapse. Relief came not from England, but from the arrival of Sir Francis Drake, fresh from plundering Spanish holdings in the Caribbean. Seeing the settlers' desperate state, Drake offered to take them back to England. Most accepted, abandoning the island and its fragile beginnings. Yet Raleigh was undeterred. The failure was a setback, but not the end of his vision. In 1587, a new group of settlers, this time including women and children, set sail under the leadership of John White. Their mission was not to fight for survival as soldiers in a hostile land, but to build homes, raise families, and plant the roots of a permanent English colony. They carried with them tools, seeds, and hope, that intangible fuel of human endeavor. And yet lurking just beyond the glow of their optimism was the shadow of the unknown, the storms of the Atlantic, the complexities of native alliances, the absence of quick aid from England. All these dangers loomed, though perhaps none imagined just how final and complete the mystery of their fate would be. Roanoke, in 1587, was a settlement at the threshold, standing between a dream and the void. Its inhabitants did not yet know they were stepping into one of history's deepest enigmas. But the stage was set, and the curtain was about to rise on a story that would baffle generations to come. Chapter 3. A Vanishing Act. The year is 1590. The summer heat clings to the shores of Roanoke Island as John White's small ship approaches the coastline. It has been 3 long years since he last set foot here. 3 years since he left behind his daughter, son-in-law, and infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. 3 years of uncertainty. 3 years of imagining what life might be like for them in this untamed wilderness. He has returned now with supplies, food, tools, seeds, to keep the struggling colony alive. The English crown had been preoccupied with war against Spain, and White's pleas to return sooner had gone unheard. But finally, the moment has come. As the ship draws nearer, White's heart pounds with a mixture of excitement and dread. He scans the familiar shoreline, searching for smoke from cooking fires, movement among the trees, some sign of life from the settlement he left behind, but the beach is quiet. The wind carries only the sound of waves and gulls. White and his men make landfall, pushing through the underbrush toward the palisade walls of the colony. The wooden fort is still standing, though weathered by the salty air, but the gates hang open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Inside, the houses are empty. No voices, no laughter, no signs of struggle, just a haunting stillness. The gardens that once grew corn, beans, and squash have been overtaken by weeds. The wooden fences lean and splinter. A few rusting tools lie abandoned where they were once used. It is as if every soul simply stood up one day, walked away, and never came back. On a tree near the entrance, White spots something. Letters, crudely carved into the wood. C.R.O. His pulse quickens. This was the agreed-upon signal. Before leaving in 1587, White had instructed the colonists to carve a sign into a tree if they moved, and to add a cross if they were in danger. He hurries deeper into the settlement, scanning for more clues. And then he sees it, on a sturdy post, carved in clear, deliberate letters. CROATOAN, CROATOAN, the name of a nearby island, home to an indigenous tribe allied with the English. Relief flickers in White's mind. Perhaps they had moved there, finding shelter and friendship. There is no cross carved alongside the word, which means, in theory, they were not under immediate threat when they left. But the weather turns against him. A violent storm rolls in from the sea, forcing White and his crew to abandon their search. The ship is driven away from the coast, battered by relentless wind and rain. By the time the skies clear, they are too far out to risk returning. White pleads to go back, but his men refuse, fearing another storm will claim them all. He sails back to England, without answers. In the years that follow, White writes letters, petitions for expeditions, and tries to return, but fate denies him every time. He dies, never knowing what became of his family. And so the colony remains, gone, not destroyed, not buried in ruins, just gone. The word CROATOAN becomes the only surviving clue to one of history's most perplexing disappearances. What happened to them? Did they integrate into the CROATOAN tribe, marrying into their community and abandoning European life? Were they attacked by other tribes? Their remains lost to the forest? Did disease or famine force them to flee deeper into the wilderness, only to perish in some unknown place? Every theory feels possible, yet none can be proven. The silence of Roanoke is its greatest weapon. It speaks nothing, yet demands questions. The fort stands empty. The trees whisper in the wind. And the ghosts of Roanoke, if there are any, keep their secrets still. Chapter 4. The Vanishing. By the summer of 1590, the world beyond Roanoke had not stood still. England was gripped by war with Spain. The Spanish Armada had been defeated just 2 years earlier, and ships and sailors were in short supply. Governor John White had left Roanoke in 1587 to gather supplies, expecting to return quickly. But politics, storms, and danger on the high seas delayed him for nearly 3 years. 3 years. For a colony still in its infancy, cut off from the mother country. When White finally returned, it was not as a triumphant leader bringing hope. It was as a man filled with anxious uncertainty. His small relief fleet approached Roanoke Island in August 1590, the humid summer air heavy with the scent of salt and pine. The shoreline lay quiet, too quiet. There were no fires, no voices, no movement along the familiar wooden palisade. The settlers, all 115 of them, men, women, and children, were gone. Their homes stood weathered and partially dismantled. Weeds sprouted between the paths where laughter and footfalls once rang. White's eyes scanned the settlement, looking for a sign, any sign. And then he saw it, carved into a post in large, deliberate letters. CROATOAN. Another carving, simply CRO, was found on a nearby tree. White's mind flashed back to the plan he had left with the colonists. If they were forced to leave, they would carve the name of their destination into a post. If they left under duress, they would add a Maltese cross. There was no cross here, suggesting they had left willingly, perhaps moving to CROATOAN Island, home of friendly allies among the Croatan tribe. But the clues stopped there. The small boats were gone. Personal belongings were missing, as if packed and taken along. No bodies, no evidence of an attack, no signs of a hurried escape. Just a silence that seemed to press in on all sides, broken only by the gulls overhead. White was desperate to follow the trail, to sail to CROATOAN Island immediately. But the weather turned against him. Fierce storms battered the coast, damaging the ship and scattering its crew's resolve. Supplies were running low, and the approaching hurricane season threatened to trap them. Reluctantly, bitterly, White was forced to turn away, his heart heavy with unanswered questions. He would never see his daughter, Eleanor, or his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World, again. The ship sailed back to England, carrying nothing but the haunting word CROATOAN and the enduring mystery of a colony that had simply vanished. And so began one of history's greatest enigmas, a question whispered across centuries. Did they integrate with the Croatan people? Did they perish in the wilderness? Were they taken by force? Or did something far stranger occur? Something that left no trace but a single carved word. Chapter 5. Theories and Shadows. The story of Roanoke does not end with the last known sighting of its colonists. It begins there. From the moment John White stood on the shore in 1590, staring at the letters CRO carved into a tree and CROATOAN etched into a post, the mystery began to take on a life of its own. These clues, so stark and deliberate, were not merely the idle scratchings of a bored settler. They were a message, whether of hope, of relocation, or of something far more ominous, we cannot be certain. And it is here that speculation blossoms, as historians, archaeologists, and storytellers have all tried to piece together what could have happened in those missing 3 years. One of the most widely discussed possibilities is also the most straightforward, that the colonists moved to CROATOAN Island, today known as Hatteras Island, where their allies, the CROATOAN people, lived. The friendship between the English settlers and the CROATOANs had been genuine, nurtured carefully by Manteo, a native of CROATOAN heritage who had even traveled to England with earlier expeditions. If this was indeed the case, then perhaps the CROATOAN carving was nothing more than a clear, honest note left behind. A beacon saying, "We are safe. Come find us." But if it were that simple, why had John White found no trace of them when storms forced him to turn back? Why was there no record, no second encounter, no happy reunion? The answer may lie in the merciless realities of the time. The threat of hostile tribes, the fragile food supply, and the dangers of navigating a landscape where alliances could shift overnight. Yet other theories wander into far darker territory. Some believe that the settlers were not merely relocated, but absorbed into another tribe, willingly or otherwise, through necessity. Survival in the New World was grueling, and the colonists, facing shortages of food, weapons, and manpower, may have found themselves dependent on the goodwill of neighboring peoples. Over time, they might have shed their English ways, adopting the language, dress, and customs of their hosts until they were indistinguishable from them. If this happened, their English identity was not lost in a single moment. It dissolved slowly, like mist on the morning air. But there are more chilling whispers. Among the competing tribes in the region were those who saw the English not as potential friends, but as unwelcome intruders. A clash whether sudden or drawn out, could have ended in disaster for the settlers. The absence of bodies or ruins might suggest they were taken alive, scattered, and forced into lives from which they could never return. To some, the carvings themselves may have been decoys, signs intended to lead any pursuers away from the truth. Then, there is the possibility of famine. The winters in that part of the world could be harsh, and the sandy soil of Roanoke was poorly suited for farming. Supplies from England were delayed far beyond what anyone had planned. In desperation, the settlers might have tried to move inland, hoping to find richer hunting grounds and a more sustainable source of food. If they ventured too far without adequate maps or guides, they could have been swallowed whole by the wilderness, consumed by the forests and rivers of the Carolinas, their traces washed away over centuries. Even more unsettling are the supernatural and speculative tales that have grown around the mystery. Some storytellers have woven legends of curses, ancient warnings that the land was not meant to be claimed. Others, leaning into the strange, have imagined that disease brought over from Europe or born in the new climate wiped them out in a way that left little to no trace. Such theories, while lacking in hard evidence, persist because of the one unshakable fact: no one truly knows. Every explanation has its gaps, every theory its unanswered questions. The truth of Roanoke lies buried somewhere between historical probability and the unknowable, between what the records suggest and what the human mind cannot help but imagine. And as the years stretch on, the search for answers becomes less about solving a riddle and more about facing the reality that some parts of history will always remain in shadow. In the end, the fate of the lost colony may be forever entangled with the myths it has inspired. We do not simply want to know what happened, we want the mystery to live on, because it reminds us that the past is not as solid as we think. It is fragile, and it can vanish just as easily as an entire colony disappeared into the mists of the 16th century. The Lost Colony of Roanoke remains one of history's most haunting enigmas, a story that refuses to be fully told, a mystery that slips just beyond our grasp. For centuries, scholars, explorers, and dreamers have returned to the shores of North Carolina, searching for the vanished settlers, hoping to uncover a single clue that might finally unlock the secret. But the island keeps its silence. The forests stand as they did hundreds of years ago, dense, alive, and patient. The winds carry whispers of lives once lived, of hopes and fears etched into the soil, now hidden beneath layers of time. Roanoke is not just a place on a map. It is a symbol of human ambition and resilience, of the delicate balance between hope and hardship that defines every journey into the unknown. It reminds us that history is not merely a collection of dates and facts, but a living tapestry woven from countless stories, some preserved, some lost, and some never meant to be found. As we look back on the brave souls who dared to settle this distant shore, we honor their courage and the mystery they left behind. Their fate may forever remain a question mark, but the questions themselves keep history alive. They invite us to imagine, to wonder, and to keep searching for understanding, for connection, and perhaps for a glimpse of what once was. In the end, Roanoke teaches us that some stories are not about endings. They are about the spaces in between, the moments suspended in time, where the past and the present meet, and where the unknown becomes a part of who we are. So, As you ponder the vanished colony and its silent shores, remember this: history's mysteries are not simply puzzles to solve, but echoes through time, calling us to listen closely, to keep asking, and to never stop exploring the vast, uncharted realms of the human story.